Well, welcome everyone. Winter is not our favourite time.
It's pretty awesome. What are you talking about?
I know that people push the calendar forward and so on. So a special welcome to people who come along during these months. Moving up and moving on, I did reflect a little bit about over our experience, what has come and what has gone. And I remember Politics 1 being talked about, when they talked about the armed forces in the Constitution, what they mentioned was the Army and the Navy. There was no mention of the Air Force in the original Constitution because it simply didn't exist. So there was something that was created further down. Remember, the blacksmith moved over and became in charge basically of the motor industry because of the transfer of skills. We used to wait for our petrol tanks to be filled up. Now we do it ourselves, a transition there. And one that was mentioned in the prelude, the film camera has been replaced now by digital. So all of these transitions, and there's certainly many more that we can think of. And here's one particular example, and very welcome very much James from Sydney.
Not at all, yeah.
But a frequent visitor down here.
I am indeed,
As
yeah.
I'm finding out. James is talking about a transition from the bricks and mortar type bookstore into a virtual bookstore, but with a real product at the end and so on. So, just to show you, we are independently subscribers to Bookworld.
Great, we love that.
And James has assured me that if you are not, you are very welcome to join before the end of the evening.
I'll give you an incentive.
Yes. So thank you very much indeed.
No, not at all.
We're looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. Well, great to be here. And what better place to talk about the book industry than in a library? It's fantastic. So I'm just going to start with a little video. You can probably guess. Oops, that's not the right way to go.
Professor, your bird, there was nothing I could do. He just caught fire.
Oh, and about time too. He's been looking dreadful for days. Pity you had to see him on a burning day. Frogs is a phoenix, Harry. They burst into flame when it is time for them to die, and then they are reborn from the ashes.
Well, I think it'd be a little bit presumptive to say that it was the time for Borders to die, but Borders did die, and Bookworld has tried its hardest to come out of the ashes. I've been in the book industry for quite a long time. I love the industry. It's a great product to be involved in, and what I love about the product is the way everybody has their own favourite book, but the way books influence people, either individually or indeed societies. And you all know which book that one came from, biggest selling book series in the world. Can anybody tell me what that influenced? There are 3 things that Harry Potter series influenced. First one should be fairly obvious. It was children's reading. So kids suddenly, there's a whole generation between probably about 20 now and 30 that all grew up on Harry Potter, and it brought reading back into kids. Then the other one is slightly more obscure. I wonder whether anybody can guess what that one is.
Camouflage, invisibility cloaks.
Well, that's a good one. Glasses. made kids want to wear glasses again, and no longer was wearing glasses at school seemed to be odd. And yeah, and the third one was even more bizarre. Enrollments in UK boarding schools went up for the first time in 10 years. Yeah. And you know, so these books, and clearly there's loads of books, can have massive influences on society, and we can talk about loads of them. 50 Shades of Grey, for instance, but we better not talk about the sort of things that influences. So let's move on. Book world, an unexpected journey. You're going to get a lot of book puns tonight. I'm James Webber. I've been CEO of Book World for about 3 years. Before that, I used to work for a company called WH Smith, which are a British news agency bookseller. I came to Australia in 1999 to set up WH Smith. The remit was to open 3 stores at Sydney Airport in 3 months and then go home. I never quite made the return journey. We got the stores open in Sydney. It took us about 6 months. And then we ended up building a business here, and then we bought Angus & Robertson and a company called Whitcoulls in New Zealand in 2001, and became Australia's biggest book retailer. WH Smith then sold the business in 2003, and I decided to stay. I then got a taste for the sunny climes of Australia and VB and other great beers. So I stayed on, and I've been with the business since. And in 2008, that business was bought by private equity, and we ran the business reasonably successfully until 2008, when we bought Borders, which was our biggest single competitor, really. It was growing in this country. And then we ran that, and then in 2011, the business went bust. So it went from being a very successful business to being a problem child very quickly, and took a lot of us by surprise. So I'm going to talk you through the road travelled, but I'm going to talk you through how we took these great stores to being an online pure play. And on that road, how we had loads of twists and turns, some expected, some good, some bad. And we did. We had loads of successes, but boy, we had a few failures in that. And you know, could we have seen them going? Could we have done stuff differently? Possibly. It would still be a very challenged business today. But let's go through some of that. So I'm going to go back to 1995. Now, some of the audiences I give, I have to check to see whether any of them were born in 1995, but I'm guessing that you guys just were. I had a daughter in 1995, so I remember the year well. Can anybody else think about what else happened in 1995?
Yeah, Windows 95 was released.
And that was true. eBay grew, but this guy turned up for the first time. 1995, Amazon came along and incorporated in the US in 1995. At the same year, there was a business called Kmart, which is a department store in the US. It owned 2 book chains, one called Walden Books and one called Borders. At that stage, Borders was actually the smaller of the 2 book chains. But it decided that books were no longer its core strategy, and it wanted to get rid of those. And so instead of selling them, it actually IPO'd the book chain. And Borders listed on the US Stock Exchange. It listed in 1995. It was fully subscribed, quite popular, for $12 in 1995. And what was really driving it was the stores, this big new store concept that Borders had created, and they were rolling these things out across the US. And what made them so special was the range, the massive range that they had. They were known as libraries. So other than these places, it was the biggest selection of books you could find. So a typical Dymocks, Angus & Robertson, you know, small independent bookshop will have somewhere between 7,000 to 12,000 titles. These things were holding 120,000 titles. They were massive. Not only did they hold massive range of books, but they also were multi-category. They had a massive range of music and a massive range of DVDs. So they became really an entertainment mecca and a selection of product that you just couldn't find anywhere else. Then they added coffee shops to these things, which was really a bit of genius because they became more than a shop. These things became meeting places. The average dwell time in a Borders was 45 minutes, which for a retail shop is extraordinary.
You said how long you could stand there and read the magazine?
Not how long you could, but how long on average people did. Yeah, that's right. In Singapore, people, if you walk down the rows of books in Singapore, you'd find all the books with the corners turned over. People would come in at lunchtime. Now, we used to let that happen because we felt eventually they're going to buy something. I'm not sure it was always true, but you know that was the whole policy was to allow people to come in and browse. The other thing that people don't realise is they actually offered great value. Whilst they looked like they were an expensive fit out and everything else, they brought 3 for 2 offers into Australia. So on brand new fiction, they used to offer 3 for 2 across their fiction ranges, and they were very, very good value. And you know, with that came a huge amount of loyalty, and a huge amount of trust, and a huge amount of sales. So they were very successful. By 1998, they'd rolled out about 250 and ended up with about 300 across the US. And they just started in 1998 their international expansion. So they'd opened up a store in Singapore, which ultimately ended up being their biggest Borders store in the world. And they opened up one here in South Yarra, the Jam Factory. And that was their first store in Australia. And in 1998, their share price was $40. So it had more than doubled, tripled. And they were seen as a bit of a darling of the stock exchange and a really growing business. And at this stage, they had no internet at all. Their Australian business grew to over 30 stores across Australia and New Zealand, and it was well over a $200 million turnover business in 2008 when it sold. So that's how big they were. In the US, they were about $2 billion turnover. So what happened? This happened. But it wasn't just this, it was really what their reaction to the internet was. So Borders' first entry into the internet was at the end of 1998. They decided, Amazon had been going for 3 years. They decided it was a new technology they needed to get into. Barnes & Noble in the US was their biggest competitor. And they started in 1996, about a year after Amazon. So Borders were late. And then they spent $10 million in 1 year to try and catch up. And it was a disaster. Lost loads of money. They carried on going for 3 years. Never really getting the offer right, never really knowing what they were doing. And in 2001, their shareholders said, enough's enough. We're not good at this. We don't know anything about the internet. There's somebody out there who's pretty good. Let's do a deal with them. So in 2001, Borders decided that it would hand over all their internet customers to Amazon. And they did a deal with Amazon, where Amazon paid them a commission. And they sent anybody, and Amazon ran an internet website for them. So anybody who wanted to buy books online, Borders drove to Amazon. This did 2 things. One is it drove their entire customer base to experience online retailing with a great online retailer under a different brand. And secondly, Amazon had just come through the dot-com bust in 2000 and wasn't actually looking particularly good at this time. And suddenly got this great consumer base in its core product category from which they could then sell all their other products to. So it really got Amazon running and fast. So you have to say, how do some very intelligent, clever people make a decision like that? Because ultimately it was catastrophic. Now I can't really answer that because I was not part of Borders US, but I was part of the business in Australia at that time and later. And it wasn't too dissimilar. And we made some decisions. So I can actually understand why they would have done that. And I'm going to take you through some of that stuff. So we were running Angus and Robertson in 2003 through to 2007. By then, we inherited Angus and Robertson with an arrangement. And they had an arrangement with an internet provider called Seek Books. The reason being is they saw that the internet was something they needed to be in, but they had no idea how to do it. They had no expertise, and they certainly didn't have $10 million to build one themselves. And at that time, building internet businesses was expensive. But there was somebody who did know a bit about it called Seek Books, and they were based in Sydney. So they got Seek Books to run their internet site, white label their internet website. And it sort of ticked along, and they paid Angus and Robertson a percentage of every sale, and Angus and Robertson had no costs, nothing. And this ran along pretty well for Angus and Robertson, but clearly this was going to be a major part of the business going forward. And so we made a decision in 2007 to take it off Seek Books and do it ourselves. But the big question, I think, is not whether it was right or wrong to give it to them, because I think at the time Angus and Robertson had no choice. If they wanted to play in the internet, they had no expertise, no money, they had to do it. The big issue is, why was Seek Books such a failure? Why has nobody ever heard of them now? Because they had the real opportunity to be the Amazon of Australia. You know, the biggest book retailer in the country had just given them all their customers, all their things. If they'd really focused, and it's really interesting that the guy who owned Seek Books was an IT entrepreneur who spent most of his time in the States looking for the next great thing. And he actually ignored this business over here in Australia. But he could have actually sewn up this market, I think, if he'd really known what he was doing. Which is exactly what was happening in the US with Amazon. So these guys didn't, and we set up in 2007, we decided to do this ourselves. So a bit like Borders in 1998, it was of course 9 years later on, but the e-commerce industry in this country was pretty nascent still in 2007. You know, there weren't experts lying around. And so in 2007, we set ourselves up. We decided that we wanted to have a fully integrated e-commerce and bricks and mortar business, which was right, made sense. You know, we had all these stores with all these products. We wanted all that product to be online, so you could go onto the internet, look to see what stores had what product, buy it, all of that. So theoretically, that all made sense, but it was complex. We had nobody with experience in e-commerce in our business. We had lots of bright guys, and we put two very bright guys in charge of running that business. One was an accountant, and one was a marketing guy. Both very, very good, rate them very highly. But they had no experience. They were then advised by one of the big accountancy firms, and we went for a massive solution to crack a nut. It was too big. And ultimately, we should have taken it in small steps. So instead of doing a crawl, walk, run, we tried to build the biggest thing you'd ever seen. And we did. We built something on unproven technology, and we built a monster. And a year later, almost exactly the same thing happened to us as happened to Borders in the US. We'd sunk $1.5 million in this, which for a business of our size was like them sinking 10. And then we'd lost about $1 million on the damn thing. So our shareholders were pretty close to doing exactly what Borders said, and said, we can't do this, we're crap at it, let's get rid of it. Yeah? But they didn't. That's actually when they gave it to me. Because we were reigning, and we had the inevitable train wreck. Yeah? That happened. Now, they gave it to me, which is probably exactly the wrong thing to do, because I was another one of these intelligent people with no experience in e-commerce. But I was lucky that we had just, in the latter part of this thing, employed a guy out of the UK who had started his own music business, and he'd sold it to Virgin. It was a small business, But he realised that with the Virgin brand, they were late entry into music in the UK in terms of online. He realised he was never going to be able to compete with them. So he got in there early, he had no real brand, he knew the brands would have ultimately win that battle, and he flogged it. And he came out to Australia, and he looked at us and he thought, geez, you've got Angus and Robertson brand and you've got the Borders brand, because we'd just bought them in 2008. You're not doing e-commerce well. He just thought he'd give his right eye teeth to have those brands and do what he did. So suddenly we had somebody in the business who actually knew about e-commerce retailing and how to set this thing up. And we had to then find some proven technology, because the stuff we'd done it on didn't work. So the first thing he told me was, we've got to throw this stuff in the bin. So my first board meeting after he was involved was to go around and say, hey guys, you know that stuff we just spent $1.5 million on? We've got to throw it away. So the first thing the board told me to do was fire him and find somebody else. Yeah, because clearly he didn't know what he was talking about, and they just made all these decisions. And I said, well, you know, I think he knows what he's talking about. And I said, look, I wouldn't tell you to do this if I didn't have a plan. And my plan will cost you $500,000, not $1.5 million, and we will do it in a small way. And if we get it right, we'll then invest more. And if we don't, you can then get rid of both of us. So that was really, we'd found somebody in the UK who had actually launched the Borders UK website, and they'd done it very quickly and very cheaply. And you've got to remember, technology was moving at a pace now. So, you know, to actually do these things was becoming cheaper. You know, $500,000 is not cheap, but it was a lot cheaper than $1.5 million. And we were able to get those guys involved. We put in a fit for purpose, we didn't try and boil the sea in our first iteration. And I had the understanding of these guys. These guys actually gave us a second chance. And that was really important, because they could quite easily have not have done, and I would have understood that. And then we would have been probably where Borders was at that point. So in 2009, we launched 2 websites. One in about April 2009, the Angus and Robertson site relaunched. And by May that year, we were making money. So within 3 weeks of launching the new website, we were profitable. And the difference was, we only showed anybody on the website a product that we had in stock. So you couldn't order a product if it wasn't in stock. Because the other website showed you millions of products, none of which were available, all of which you ordered, and then you spent the next 3 months writing me emails and ringing me up asking where my order is. And that was customer service was the major issue. Trying to just get on top of all the customer service inquiries. So we never did that. So we only listed, and slowly but surely we got more and more suppliers and more links and more stuff, and we built a really credible range. In fact, we built the biggest range in Australia. But we didn't start with that. We built that over time. And by the end of 2010, we were the fastest growing and biggest online retailer of books in Australia. And we did incredibly well. But then 2011 happened, and in 2011 we went into administration in February because of the stores. So I'll talk you through a bit. You had this great e-commerce business, but the store networks struggled. So what happened to that great Borders store business? Well, we've talked about technology disruption. We've talked about what they were facing. And they had made, a reasonable effort. We had a reasonably good start on the internet. But, we were doing $20 million. The stores, this was a $200 million business going backwards at 10–15%. So this was huge sales. We weren't bridging that nearly well enough to cover their sins. But what also happened outside of that is what I call a confluence of events and the perfect storm. So the range offer in those stores had suddenly been completely, you have to stand for something in retail, and we stood for range, multi-category, value. The range offer disappeared the day that really Amazon started offering people 5 million titles. 120,000 titles sounds a lot when you're competing against Angus and Robertson or Dimmocks. But when you're competing against Amazon, it's not. Then we had a multi-category offer, but we lost one of the categories almost overnight because your mate's Apple. Yeah. The iPod came out and just took away an entire category. And DVD was going heavily that way. And then e-reading happened. Now, actually, we did a brilliant job with e-reading because we got into it very early. And again, a bit like the internet, we actually said, well, look, we do not have the technology or expertise to know how to do this. But there was a company in Canada called Indigo Books that was launching a business called Kobo. And we said, right, well, we'll do a deal with them. We were already quite close to Indigo Books because we knew that they had big store chains. And we said, right, let's do a deal with them so that we will sell Kobo and their e-reading facility into Australia. And I tell you what, because we think this could be something big, let's take an equity stake in that business. So we put $1 million of equity into their business. Because we never know, we thought that might be the business of the future. We launched Kobos into this market in 2010, May. We were the first and only business to launch globally with devices and apps, both Android and Apple apps, all at the same time. We launched here before the iBook store was open, and we launched before Kindle was in the market. And by Christmas that year, we probably had 50% market share of the ebook market. We sold 120,000 of those Kobos on the right, and every one of those customers came on and started buying books from us. So it was great, but again, it was too little, too late. You know, it wasn't going to bridge the gap that the stores were suffering. But I still feel that we did a good job on that. These are the things that you probably don't know about that impacted us. So every year we have, in our industry, massive sellers. And for years we had 7 Harry Potters. We had 3 Dan Browns. We had, I think, 3 or 4 Stephanie Meyers. There were 3 Stieg Larsson books. And suddenly 2011 came across. And on top of all of that problems that we were having, we had no blockbusters at all. And this came too late. This came a year too late. So we were without a blockbuster, we were without everything else, and then to add insult to injury, we had the global financial crisis, which had happened about 2 years earlier, but Kevin Rudd's subsidies had actually seen us through those 2 years. But in 2011, this began to really bite, and it just happened on top of everything else. So what took 10 years to build took about 6 months to close, and those stores all closed. But the e-commerce business fundamentally was doing extremely well. So what we needed was a white knight. We needed somebody to come and find us and help us out. And we found it in this chap. So Penguin Books decided they ran a publishing business, they sell books. The biggest problem they had is that the biggest internet book retailers in Australia were all sitting outside of Australia. It was Amazon and Book Depository. And none of them bought books locally. They all shipped them in from overseas. And they wanted a vibrant local internet business to buy books locally. And so they took the opportunity to buy us. But they didn't really have a plan, and they didn't really know anything about the business. And they bought 2 brands, angusandrobertson.com.au and borders.com.au. And when we looked at the brands and the issues in terms of how well those brands were perceived in the marketplace, Borders had always had the strongest brand empathy of any book retailer. And they'd gone from the top to the bottom due to it being in liquidation, and us leaving, I don't know, hundreds and thousands of its customers with gift cards because we went into liquidation in February, unredeemed. So they all hated us. Now, funny enough, Angus and Robertson did exactly the same, but actually it flinched, but not by much. So everybody sort of put the blame and the anger and the angst onto Borders. And I think that's 120 years worth of brand value that was in Angus and Robertson. and the bit of the tall poppy syndrome in Borders. So we decided we could no longer live with the Borders brand. It had also gone bust in the US and the UK, so it was damaged pretty much globally. So we had to rebrand, we felt, the Borders brand. And the obvious thing to do was to actually close it and throw everything at Angus and Robertson. But ultimately, we wanted our internet business to not only be strong in Australia, but to go overseas. And Angus and Robertson is the world's worst e-commerce brand name. You've got Angus and Robertson. You can't use the ampersand. It's terribly long. It's a right mouthful. And it doesn't mean anything to anybody outside of Australia. But we happen to own a brand called Bookworld. So what we thought is we needed to rebrand, and so we did. We rebranded Borders to Bookworld, which we felt we could take international and we could build here. Now, just creating a brand name doesn't make you very successful. You then have to stand for something that, to your customers. But we were now a very, very different business from the Borders, and we had to find a customer value proposition that was attractive enough to A, retain the existing customers that are still with us, and they'd been through hell and back. Plus we had to try and reactivate this massive customers who'd all left us during the liquidation process. And then we needed to be attractive enough to find new customers. So I'll introduce you to something that I use a bit when I look at retail models. It was done by a couple of consultants called Anders and Stern. It was used in the States to really look at the US grocery market. And what it basically says is you need to stand for one of 5 things. You can stand for more, but you need to actually stand and lead by one of 5 things. And if you don't, you will end up in the sea of mediocrity with an ever-increasing gravitational pull to the black hole. And if you think about it, that's exactly what happened to Borders. Borders stood for great range, great multi-category, and ultimately those all got eroded. And finally, because we actually got into financial trouble, they actually took away value as well, and that was probably the final nail. And then up it went into the black hole of retail. So it's called the EST model because you either have to be the biggest. So, in bricks and mortar retail, that's Walmart. In our retail, it's Amazon. They're the biggest range of anybody. Now, just because if you can't be the biggest, you've got to be big enough to be credible. So, we actually have on our website over 23 million SKUs, of which we make available about 10 million. That's a massive range. There isn't much we don't have. But are we as big as Amazon? No, we're not. But we're big enough to be very, very credible. You could be the cheapest. That's Costco. Yeah. Amazon's pretty much there, but it really isn't in Australia. They're not by a long way the cheapest. They're the best operators, really. So there are other retailers that take on that, and you see them in the deal sites. They try and be the cheapest. Then you can be the easiest, the best at service. And that's really where you get convenience store retailing. The stores are where you are. Airport retailing, Circular K, and 7-Eleven all sort of fit in that. Or you can be the quickest, and that's McDonald's. Now, we actually felt out of all of these, this is where we could be. We're sitting in Australia. Everybody else, the big guys, are all over there. It takes you 10 to 15 days to get the product. So that became an area of focus for us. And then the final, anybody want to try and guess the final one? Cheapest. Cheapest. No, we've got cheapest up there. Cheapest. Yeah, almost. It's not bad. Yeah. And we couldn't launch with this, but you could have an aspiration to be it. The hottest. Yeah. So if you're Nike, you don't actually have to have the biggest range. You don't have to have that. If you're Apple, you don't. You're just hot. So this is our old warehouse. It's in Thomastown. I don't have to explain where that is to you guys. Thomastown, we used to run a business called Calendar Club. which was set up by an entrepreneur called Paul Breen, who wrote that article at the beginning of the on your website, which I sent you as an intro to this. He's a really interesting guy. He's not a serial entrepreneur and business coach and consultant. Has been a very good friend of mine. But he set up Calendar Club. I used to run Calendar Club. When the e-commerce business first got into trouble in 2007, and they gave it to me, half the reason it got into trouble is it was being encumbered with crap from the big business. So I grabbed it and dragged it out to Thomastown, and we set up here, which you can imagine the employees really thanked me for. So we only had one rule, and that's you don't leave after dark. Unless, of course, you want to buy drugs. So, yeah, it's a pretty... But it actually was a pretty fit for purposing, and it was cheap, and it got us up and running, and we got the business started up there. We had state-of-the-art air conditioning in the offices, and the bookshelves, you know, that area only flooded about twice a year. But it worked, and it was small. Anyway, when Penguin bought us, we had to look around at what Penguin could do to help us.
Is that Pearson?
Pearson. They own this. This is quite nice. This is the biggest book warehouse in Australia. 30,000 square metres. We get through over 30 million books go out of that place. Fully automated. And this gave us something that nobody else in Australia had.
So where is that?
That's in Scoresby. Yeah. So, you know, clearly that opportunity to be the quickest with that sort of asset sitting there was really there. So that became our fundamental point of difference. Fast, free delivery, 2 to 3 days. We promised 2 to 3 days. If you order before 11 o'clock and it's in a pick bay, you'll get it the next day, even if you're in Sydney and possibly Brisbane. It is now no longer free. I'll go on to that later. We actually charge for that. We just felt it was too good to give away free. So we have a charge on shipping. But it got us going for the first couple of years. Next thing you had to do is just take price out of the equation. For most people, that's Amazon. So we just guaranteed to beat Amazon by 10%. And it actually isn't as difficult as it appears, because Amazon charge for shipping into you. And those shipping costs are huge.
Have you found that the recent increases in US postage rates have actually helped you in being able to charge for freight?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything is yeah, absolutely. You know, everything is beginning to get a lot easier at 70 cents or 75. Be a bit even easier at 70 cents for us. Yeah. And the last 3 years have been horrendous, really, with the dollar sitting at a dollar parity. It used to cost me more to get a book from Scoresby to a house in Melbourne than it did to get a book from the US or the UK to that same house in Melbourne. That is now changing. So you'll see the online retailers in Australia will begin to get, they're better now at what they do. We're better invested in technology. We've got better platforms. We've got better deliveries. So we're operationally a lot better across the board. And we're now beginning to play a bit more in that price bracket. So we took that out. So we have an Amazon, you know, if we can't beat Amazon, we'll beat them by 10%. Then in terms of getting into that hottest category, we couldn't launch and be the hottest, so nobody had ever heard of us, but we wanted to engage our consumers. So instead of just signing up and buying a product, we actually gave people the opportunity to become a citizen of Bookworld. I thought that sounded quite cute. But for a citizen of Bookworld, you used to get the discounted price that we had on there, plus an extra 10%. So it was a pretty compelling offer. And we did that because to go through that process, engaged you for a while, because you had to go through and tell us what genres you liked to read. Yeah, it was completely free to join. You got this extra 10%, so a pretty compelling offer on there. But at the end of the day, what we wanted was data so that we could speak to you more personally about what your likes were in reading. So we get a bit of data, they get an extra 10% out, and we get a bit of engagement from those guys. And this program has been really, really successful. We then had to improve our customer service. In the old Borders days, we had about a 2 to 3 day turnaround of customer service inquiries, and it just wasn't good enough. So we changed that to 2 to 3 hours. So we now get back to people, it's actually, I think it's about 60 to 80% within 3 hours and 100% within the same day. And then we wanted to play on being Australian. You know, we're an Australian business, employing Australian people, paying tax in Australia, da-da-da-da-da, all that stuff, yeah? Well, actually, we probably don't, because we don't make money yet, but anyway, Penguin do. So, yeah, you know, and that's becoming quite an emotive thing now. You know, the Googles, the Apples, any of these guys is not, they will not for too much longer, I don't believe, be allowed to by governments. I mean, massive amount of money. We all talk about GST and bringing the level of GST on them. That's nothing compared to, you know, I can't tell you what I spend on Google a month. And every time I do it, I get an invoice from Google Ireland. It's just not right. You know, so that will change. I'm sure that will change. So that was our customer value proposition. It was pretty compelling. We liked it. We put together a modern, contemporary website, and off we went. And it's been very successful. So this is our citizen membership graph. When we started this, we thought we'd get a sudden surge from the old Borders database of citizen sign-ups, and then it would all die off, and it would sort of plateau out and be a steady climb. This thing has gone for 2.5 years, and it's virtually been a straight line. And that dip right at the far end is only because we've just put shipping charges on, and we've changed something, the thing in the price. We've actually taken away the 10% citizen discount because we've moved all our prices down by 10% to match that. And we've done that because we have to get our lowest prices into Google, what they call Google Shopping. So Google Shopping is when you go onto Google and you put in, you know, Harry Potter, and you'll find 4 books come up from 4 different suppliers with a price. They only allow you to put your list price in there. They don't allow membership prices. So our citizen membership price couldn't get in there. Now this is very important for driving new customers because it gets right up in your face. And this has only been around for about 18 months. And so we ended up having to change our entire business model because of Google, which was a shame because it was going very well.
So
but
how did you handle existing customers who had signed up to the thing?
Well, they were getting the 10%. They just didn't know. So we actually moved all our prices down by 10% to the citizen price. So we emailed everybody and said, right, the citizen price is now going, and you're all going to get it. So actually what we did is we gave non-citizens their discount.
Yes.
So we haven't made them feel special. So now what we have to do is we have to give them specials, and we do that through email marketing. But it's not ideal. They're not as engaged as they used to be. And we'll change that. But what was interesting about the Citizen program when we had it, only 20% of these guys were ex-Borders. We expected the Borders guys to just come across. You know, hey guys, we're now Book World. We're not the bad guys that went into liquidation. We're a new bunch of people. Come back to us. All is forgiven. You know, open arms, da-da-da-da. And they all went, piss off. You know, once bitten, twice shy. And it was really interesting because that was a massive, what we thought, low-hanging fruit. And we couldn't actually get these guys back. You know, it's beginning to happen now, but I mean, they were 2.5 years away. So that was a big learning, you know. But what we were able to do is get a lot of other new customers on board. And those that did come on board through this program were buying 20% more every time they bought, and they came back 70% times more than a non-citizen. So on average, these guys were over 100% more valuable to us. So they become a very important part of our business. And they eventually ended up accounting for 80% of revenue. And they opted into marketing, which is really important because then we can talk to them afterwards. So that engagement thing is really important. you've got customers who just come and buy and they're not engaged. If you can get your customer in some way to engage with your brand, just invest a little bit of time, that's all it is, and feel part of something, then you get an added benefit. So in all our channels of marketing, we try and engage people. SEM is what we call Google and paid search, where we pay for words so that when you put the word in, we come up first. SEO is organic, it's search engine optimization. Not a lot, you can do lots to it, but it's a slow burner. Email marketing is clearly one of our biggest forms of communicating. We do use traditional media, and I'll show you a bit about how we've used that. We tend to link it in with social. Our loyalty program is our citizen program, which has been very successful, and then we have other online retargeting and other stuff. Social media we spent a lot of time on. Social media is an interesting one from an e-commerce business because it's a bit of a buzzword, but trying to actually track real returns from your spends on social media is very difficult. So great thing about the internet is you see stuff immediately. You go out and do a promotion, you get sales, you see it the next day, it's all tracked in a way that you can't see in bricks and mortar retail. You don't get that immediacy. Social, it's very difficult to get that return. But we felt that this was a very, very important channel for the younger age group, but especially for a new brand to get into. So we used to try and link all this stuff together. So a couple of Christmases ago, we went out with an advertising campaign and we took out signs at bus stops. Pretty traditional stuff, giving our thing. But we decided what we wanted to do was do stuff a bit differently. So we said, what about taking out one of those signs and putting bookshelves in it and making them look pretty? So on about 6 or 7 of these, we took out the sign and we just put real books behind perspex, like a Christmas tree. And then we sent out social messages for people to try and find them. And when they got there, they had to take a photo. And so we got a real interaction through this, and it was quite a buzz. And that was one we did in the rainbow. And then some clever part said, well, I wonder what would happen if we didn't have the perspex there. So we all said, well, they'll all come and steal it. And we thought, well, yeah, they would do, but it'd be quite interesting to see what happened. So on 2 sites, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne, very, very cheaply, we decided to put a camera and take away the perspex and just film what happened. And I'm going to show you a video. Some of it is done on my son's GoPro. Part of it is done very professionally on a decent camera. The sound is not great, but I would just ask you to try and look at the taglines underneath, which tell you, because we just captured something quite special with this. So just by thinking a bit out of the box, we sort of captured that and put it on YouTube, and it just went ballistic. And it was just great. There wasn't a single sign at those things saying take a book. and everybody sort of touched them and oh gosh, they're real, and they move, and oh, can I take? And then they put it back because it was all in nice. They didn't want to put it out, and eventually we'd say to one person, go and take one, and then they did, and off it spiraled. But it was great, and it was we just captured that discovery of a book, I think, in that, and we're able to then use that through social media to really put our brand out there. And you know, our two biggest competitors are probably Book Depository and Booktopia. They're both book. You know, so trying to make ourselves different in tone of voice and the way we communicate is really important to us. So in 2.5 years, we've collected 100,000 social followers. To give you an idea of that, Dimmocks, who have been around forever and a day, have 25,000 social followers. We've got more social followers than anybody else in the book industry, including Book Depository, including those guys. Social followers is one thing, but the clout score is a score of engagement of those guys, and we have the highest clout score of anybody. Including our owners, Penguin, who've been around and been playing social. So we've done a really good job at trying to engage through those social channels. And we won a lot of awards for that. We're probably the most awarded online business last year for marketing. Not that always pays the bills, but so that's really where we've got to. I thought I'd just go through some of the things we've learnt whilst we've been through this process, particularly around how businesses look at a paradigm shift. Yeah, I think the biggest learning is when you see something change and you want. Yeah. I think the biggest learning is when you see something change and you want to have a go at something. Is there anybody who's got a real first-hand experience? I mean, if there isn't, you get consultants, you get somebody with you know, having the right people who reinvent the wheel is not always the best way. And then reinvent it square. I think in this, using proven technology, you know, if you're in a specific category or fashion retail or whatever, use something that's done that well before. Don't try and get something that isn't proven. If you do, it's risky. The other thing about using third parties, often you are too small. You don't have the funds. You have to use a third party. And it's right to, you have no choice. You know, we have no choice but to use secrets back then. And in society, borders may not have had any choice but to use Amazon. But if you're going to use them, how important could they become? How important would they be? Imagine if Borders US had taken a 10% stake in Amazon in 2001 and said, right, let's do this deal, we'll buy it, we'll have 10%. And they invested in that. And when they got to 2011 and they were catastrophically in trouble, I wonder what that investment would have been worth. It probably paid off all their debt and let them reinvent themselves in a different way. Our $1 million in Kobo was worth $3 million in 2011, so it went up 2 times. It wasn't enough to save us, but so you know, if you're using third parties, are they doing something core to your business? Because if they are, you know, is an equity stake even possible? If not, when you bring that stuff in-house, at what point do you actually own that IP and that technology? And clearly Borders US left that way too late. If they were going to take it, they eventually launched in the US their own website in 2008-9. But by then it was too late. Amazon got them. Are you leveraging all the assets in your business? So, you know, if you've got store networks, just because you're in the e-com business, you know, leverage the stores. And that requires you to get everybody on board. You know, we had assets in terms of the distribution facilities, but you know, if we had a store network, it would be brilliant to launch an e-com business, because you've got everybody coming into stores, you can introduce it. But to do that, you've got to get the stores on board. So you've got to get everybody on board to do that. Otherwise, the businesses are fighting each other, and that doesn't help. And then finally, you have the right shareholder. And often you don't. So you talked about cameras and the move of what happened to Kodak. Do you know who invented digital cameras? Kodak. So they had it. So why didn't they transform their business? Basically, the shareholders were asking their guys to do this. They were protecting their old paramount. So when you start with this stuff, how do you know whether you've got the right shareholder? If you're being asked to, look, we've got to protect our stores, you've got to help drive traffic to your stores. You're not allowed to price James the same, cheaper than the store network. Yeah. If you're being asked to do all those things, you've probably got the wrong shareholder. Because what we have to do is actually wear this on. Because if we don't disrupt them, somebody else is going to do it. So it's not right to price. If I've got competitors online that are pricing below our store prices, I have to price to be successful online. But if I don't, I won't have a business. And the fact that the stores are going to go bust will happen anyway, as it shows. So our job should be to potentially put the stores out of business. Now, somewhere in that road, you'll find the middle ground and you'll start doing it. There is stuff we can do to help the stores. But, if your shareholder sees you as go ahead and try and disrupt our business, then you've got the right shareholder. And it's a very difficult mindset for them to have when the money's coming through elsewhere. And that's often why you need a separate business, or you need to farm it out, or you need to do something different. And even if your shareholder does allow you to do it, it's no great guarantee. It didn't help us, we were too late. So that's our sort of journey so far. I'd like to think there are a few more chapters to go. Happy to take any questions. And that code at the top, if you write it down and you put it in when you check out, will give you an extra 10% off and free shipping.
By midnight tonight, is that right?
I think it will extend to the end of May. Yeah. That's where we're at.
James, one of the things that Amazon do well, I find the reviews of their books are, in the main, very well constructed. They're not Twitter type chatter and so on. They're a reasoned sort of review, and that adds to the experience of going online. Have you been doing things like that?
Yeah, we have reviews, and we have the ability for customers to leave reviews. So the best reviews are customer reviews, because they're what they call unique content. So you can buy reviews, but then you get, if you put the same review as other people, you get penalised by Google for having duplicate content. So we have, going forward, the aim to incentivise consumers to do activities that are good for us, and one of which would be leaving a review. So the citizen programme is in a state of flux at the moment, because if you think about it, it started as a 10% discount, additional discount. We took that 10% away. So now it's just a, here you go, you're a citizen, here's an offer. So you get special offers, and you get lots of special offers, and it's still quite good, but it's not quite as meaningful. So when we move to the shipping offer, we're actually going to give our citizens a differential shipping offer, so a cheaper shipping offer. Going forward, that will happen between now and Christmas. And then what we want to do is then tier our citizen program into different levels, and that will depend on really how active you are. So if you're leaving loads of reviews and doing lots of stuff, then you will get into a different tier at some point. But we don't have that yet. So we have a facility for people to leave reviews. Do we have as many good reviews as Amazon? No.
Who do you ship with?
Aussie Post out of UBD.
Yeah.
They're the only guys who can really give us service. We're not a big boxy type of product, so it just goes straight through.
Their post boxes are fantastic.
Yeah.
You just register a post box.
Yeah,
Your number
yeah.
on your telephone number.
Yeah.
And
It's
any
very
post office in the world, in Australia as well.
Yeah, we're not integrated with that yet.
And you just get a text saying it's arrived if you're nominated.
Right.
You go along, you put the thing in, it says it's down that way. The door pops open, and you grab it and close the door. And it says it took you 12 seconds to get that.
They're very good. And the whole of e-commerce thing is now not about buying cheaply and sitting and waiting for stuff. It's about buying it and getting it as quickly, and then in loads of different ways.
And conveniently.
Exactly. You don't want it in your home, you don't want to have to go down to the post office, you don't want to come back to a ticket. Being ticketed is probably the world's most frustrating thing. So, whether it's there or just having the option to leave it on the doormat because you're happy with that or whatever it is, all those delivery options is where the sophistication is going.
Do you have a big e-book business?
We do still have a big e-book
What
business.
apps does it use?
You use the Kobo app.
Right.
Yeah, so if you get the Kobo app on your iPad.
And Adobe.
Because one of the problems I had with e-books was that I had Stanza to start off with.
Right.
The US one. And then that was taken over in some way by Amazon. But they actually stopped some of the books that had been purchased being used in Australia.
Yeah, they would do because they don't have the rights for it.
Yeah,
So it's all about international digital rights.
Yeah.
So that's why, Kindles and stuff that are bought in the US don't work particularly well. No, I mean, Kobo is very good. I mean, it's a great experience. If you come onto our website and find the information, it will take you through how to download the apps, and then you go through, and then once you come through us, you are affiliated to us, and then you just go direct to Kobo and you use their stuff.
I think the experience with Stanza sort of put me off using anything other than
e-books is really interesting. I mean, it's gone like a rocket, and now it's clattered off. And in the US, they're talking about it sort of dropping a bit. The biggest issue is when e-books were read on a Kindle or a Kobo, a proper e-reading device, people that only did basically books, people read lots of e-books. But now people have iPads and mini iPads, and you can do everything on that. You can do your email, you can play Angry Birds, you can do it. There's just too much other stuff. So people don't read anywhere near the amount of e-books on those devices as they do on the reading device.
That reminds me of I think it was Shirley Hughes or something like that, who was an author of children's books, who said that children will only learn to read if they're bored sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's not backlit, so it's not easy at all.
Yeah. I mean, I carry a Kobo around with me. And, they're great. It's not backlit. Battery lasts 3 weeks. It's crap. But I will buy a $200 one, and I read a fair bit of books. If you're not reading that many books, then probably just want one device and read it. I'll use my phone to read a book when I'm travelling back and forth from Sydney. And it all reads through and keeps up to date on whichever device you're on. So.
How do you deal with people like me? My wife and I buy probably 10 or 20 books a year. And we'll often we need to get a gift for so-and-so. Let's go down to giving to us. Sort of leaf through the shelves, chat to the person. That works quite well. But sometimes my wife has a list of book club, 3 or 4 books she's going to buy. Instead of going to the web and checking prices and all the rest, go into book companies. So, let's go down to Dimmings. I'll probably have them and check it. So it's kind of, I bought stuff on the net and I've got Slacker now. I have the stream.
I mean, also, there's nothing like that in-store experience. If you've got somebody down there with really good knowledge who you trust, it's about being a trusted recommender. It's all book selling is. You want to become what I call a trusted recommender of other products. Now, digitally, we can do that quite effectively if you're buying of us a lot, because we can see what you're reading and we can say, hey, look, if you like this, you might like that, and all that stuff. But it's not a conversation, and it's not an experience to get out of the house and a good reason to get out of the house and do it. You've probably been in the house all day, and going down and shopping at Dillops might be a great thing. Well, as opposed to sitting down looking at another screen and buying books. So I actually don't see us destroying entirely the book industry. I think the book industry has had a really tough time and it's lost sales, and it will continue to probably lose sales for a bit longer. And they will only survive if staff wages go down or rents go down. And staff wages aren't going anywhere. And unless they're in the property, rents probably aren't either. So it's tough out there for those guys. But if enough stores close, the ones that remain should remain. There'll be a last man standing. When you look at vinyl records now, vinyl records is probably the fastest growing record music category out there. There's only still room for about 1 or 2 stores per city. It's not like Melbourne. It's not like we're suddenly seeing the rise of Virgin coming again out on the floor. I think both channels have their thing. I would bite my right arm off to have 50 stores around the country to integrate with my e-commerce site, so that when you went there, you could look up on the website and say, oh, do they have them in store? Yeah, and then you go and pick them up in store and get some advice. Look up online, pick up in store, all that stuff. When you go to stores, and we used to do it with Borders, if you went to a Border store and you couldn't find what you wanted, then they just send you online. What you do, you don't get it. You know, it delivered to your home. So, having that fully integrated model is the way to go. Trouble with dealers is the prices are so bloody expensive. They've got to pay a massive franchise fee, they've got to pay staff costs, they've got to pay rents, and ultimately it's an expensive option. But is it very expensive? And, if you enjoy them and enjoy it, it's not exactly.
On iTunes, you could always go in and hear the first 5 seconds of a.
Yeah.
To recreate the browsing experience online, if I could click on a book and read the contents or the index or a sample chapter.
Yeah, e-books do that. Some e-books do that. And Kobo has that facility. Not every e-book, but it's most of the e-books give you the ability to page through the first 10 pages or so. There's a synopsis of every book, so it's a bit bigger than the back cover little synopsis.
Yeah.
Those facilities are there. They're not probably quite the same, but they're addressed, if not perfect.
Do you deal with academic books? And because the big one is the University Co-op bookshop.
Yeah.
We
do. Look, we're owned by Pearson. Penguin used to be owned by Pearson. It's now merged with a company called Random House. But Pearson is the biggest education publisher in the world. So we've actually done quite a lot of work on education books. It's a very difficult category to get people to search effectively on, unless you lay it out right. The right way to lay out education books is to say, what institution do you go to? What are you reading? What year are you in? And then for us to be communicating with the institution to know what's on that reading list. And say, right, here you go, here's your reading list. And that's an easy way to do it, if you're at an institution or you're a student. We don't. We have to really get you to find the ISBN. And then with a lot of this stuff, there's US editions, shed load of different editions. You just have the title. You can very easily get the wrong book. But yes, we do them. The likelihood if it's an Australian, if it's available in Australia, we'll have it available.
Question about e-books. I find some e-books, particularly reference ones, very frustrating and it's very hard to navigate. Are there any changes to the standards, the way to put those things together that are going to improve that?
Look, it's technology, isn't it? And to say, we would have said that kids' books, cooking books, all that stuff is not great on ebook because it's pictures and it's whatever. But already the iPad, when we were on e-readers, they were unthinkable. Now we've got iPads and there are forms to do it. I guess it depends on how popular the book is and how much the publisher is willing to invest in making. There will be books where things look difficult because they're tables, but when you press it, it'll drop into a small video or whatever it is. They'll become dynamic in their content. But they'll need to know that they can sell enough of that book to invest their time, reduce those features. But that's ultimately where it will go. What is difficult today is probably got a solution to it. It's probably just not cost effective. So it's a matter of the cost coming down, the volumes going up.
In 2011, I was researching e-paper, where it was they were predicting you'd buy a blad or a book, duly encrusted leather bound that had blank pages, and you'd load the book in. And you'd read
it like a book.
And when you wanted to go to the next chapter, that would disappear, and the new chapter would come on, and you'd open it up, and you'd start doing it again. That was 15 years ago. Is it any closer?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know why we wouldn't buy a book. Other than the fact.
But you had your book.
I know. I get
a library on your book. And turn the pages.
I don't know. It's a quick answer. I have no idea. Nobody's ever come to me with that. I think it's still sitting in that to-do pile.
Well, that page would be pretty big. Oh, no, just substrate. Less than half a mil.
The technology probably to do that is...
One more question over there.
I'm guessing, but I suspect that businesses like Kodak were much more fixed capital intensive than the retail book industry.
Borders is pretty capital intensive.
Sorry?
Borders was pretty capital intensive.
With the stores.
From a retail perspective and in comparison to small store formats.
Does that make it more difficult for people to move?
Yes and no. I think the issue is if you're making loads of money out of a way of doing stuff, it's pretty difficult not to try and protect everything you can to keep that income stream coming in. Now, to try and do that at the same time and use some of that income stream to then create something that's actually going to destroy yourself is a pretty difficult call, unless you really get it that if you don't, somebody else will. And that's typically what happens, is somebody else comes in without any of that legacy and just does it quicker and better.
Question: how much pulping do you do, and is that going to be an issue in terms of...
Well, typically it's not the retailers that do the pulping, it's the publishers. So they have a thing called sell and return. Now we actually don't do very much sell and return, but most bookstores will return 20% of all the stuff they buy, and that goes back to the publisher. The publisher then sits around and sees whether he can get rid of it somewhere. Some places you get rid of it is called remainder books. So there's a company called Queensland Book Distributors, QBD. They've got quite good stores, but they have a load of what I call remainder product in there. So that's sort of $5 fiction, and it's the stuff with Angus and Robertson used to run a casual lease business that did trestle tables and shit. That was all remainder. And then the rest of it's pulp. And they pulp a lot. Yeah, they are terrible.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, is that going to turn people off?
Well, if it does, they should. They've got ebooks, so if you're concerned about that, buy an ebook. That's where the beauty of ebooks is there is none of that. So it's great, but people, I think, quite frankly, don't give a monkeys. And to be fair, most of the stuff is recycled anyway. There's very little new paper in books and newspapers. So.
Well, thank you, James.
Not at all.
I think it would not be unfair to say this is one of the most interesting talks in the world. Probably because, we've all been brought up in books. you go through courses, you read books. We've all experienced borders. We've seen the rise and fall, the extraordinary rise and equally more rapid demise and so on. So to actually have had this insight of somebody who's been so much part of it and explain so much of what's going on, out of the phoenix rises, the ashes rises the phoenix, isn't it? And, I was just going to ask a question. Aid books, you have mentioned, where do they stand in the hierarchy?
My understanding of the aid books is they are owned by Amazon.
I don't think
in the US, and they do sort of hard to find books. Yeah. But yeah, they're not very big up there for stuff that's right.
You'll be reassured that in our transient world, coming and going and rising and falling, I think the container for drinking
Don't worry. That sounds great.
remains constant.
Excellent. Perfect. I'll enjoy that.
There'll be no other one like that in the office.
Great.
So thank you very much once again.
No, not at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Les, do we have something after our refreshments?
No, just networking. I think Shami wants to show off something that might be interesting. Now, there may be a way to